In 2025, the United States did something it hadn't done in 52 years. It lifted the ban on supersonic passenger flight. And within months, United Airlines ordered 15 supersonic jets. American Airlines pre-ordered 20 more. Japan Airlines got in line. A company called Boom Supersonic now has over 130 aircraft spoken for, a factory running in North Carolina, and a launch date of 2029. The future is arriving faster than anyone expected. Except one airline isn't celebrating. Scandinavian Airlines, one of Europe's oldest and most respected carriers, just published a report warning that supersonic travel could trigger a fuel crisis that damages the entire European aviation industry. They're not cheering. They're sounding an alarm. And what they found should worry every airline on the planet. To understand why SAS cares so much, you need to understand what kind of airline they are. SAS has been flying since 1946. They serve 25 million passengers a year across 156 destinations. They are the largest airline in both Denmark and Sweden. In April 2026, Cirium, the most respected flight data firm in the world, ranked them the single most punctual airline on Earth, with an 89.53 on-time arrival rate. They survived 9/11. They survived the 2008 financial crash. They survived a full Chapter 11 bankruptcy in 2023 and came out stronger. This is not an airline that panics easily. So when SAS publishes a formal report warning of a structural crisis, people in the industry pay attention. And the crisis they're warning about has a name: sustainable aviation fuel, SAF. The one thing standing between aviation and its own extinction, and the one resource that supersonic travel could devour. Here's what most people forget about supersonic flight. Concorde wasn't cancelled because the technology failed. It was cancelled because the economics did. In 1973, the FAA banned supersonic flight over land in the United States. The reason was the sonic boom, a noise so powerful it shook windows, cracked walls, and sent thousands of noise complaints flooding into government offices every time Concorde passed overhead. So Concorde got boxed into two routes: New York to London, New York to Paris. That's it. You couldn't fly it over America. You couldn't fly it over Europe. Two routes on a planet with thousands. The numbers never worked. Concorde carried just 100 passengers per flight. It burned fuel like a fighter jet. British Airways and Air France ran it at a loss for 27 years, kept alive by government money and the prestige of the thing. When the last Concorde landed in October 2003, there was no replacement coming. For 22 years, supersonic passenger travel was dead. Then on June 6, 2025, the Trump administration signed an executive order. The 52-year overland ban lifted. The Supersonic Aviation Modernization Act passed the House on March 24, 2026. Suddenly, supersonic wasn't a museum piece anymore. It was a business plan. Because Boom Supersonic had spent years quietly solving the problem that killed Concorde. In January 2025, their XB-1 demonstrator broke the sound barrier over land without producing an audible boom at ground level. The physics worked. The technology was real. And now the regulatory door was open. 130 orders followed almost immediately. Here's where SAS enters the story, and here's where it gets complicated. SAS is not some low-cost airline that profits from crowded middle seats. This is the airline that in November 1954 became the first in history to fly a commercial route over the North Pole, Copenhagen to Los Angeles, because they saw a faster path that nobody else had the courage to take. Innovation is in their DNA. But innovation requires fuel. And this is the number that is keeping SAS executives up at night. The Boom Overture, the supersonic jet that United and American have queued up for, burns between 5 and 7 times more fuel per passenger than a standard economy seat on a modern widebody. 5 to 7 times. Boom will tell you to compare it to business class, which makes the number look smaller. Fair enough. Even against business class, you're still burning 2 to 3 times more fuel per seat. That's not a design flaw. That's physics. To fly twice as fast, you need roughly twice the thrust. More thrust means more fuel. Every single time, no exceptions. Now here is the problem. The European Union has legally committed its entire aviation industry to running on sustainable aviation fuel, SAF, produced from renewable sources. By 2030, airlines operating in Europe must blend at least 6 SAF into every flight. By 2050, that number hits 70. This isn't a voluntary pledge. It's law. SAS has gone further than most. They have a live partnership with Ørsted, the Danish wind energy company, to produce electro-fuel directly from wind power at Copenhagen Airport. They have committed to net zero by 2050. They have staked their entire future on the idea that clean fuel will be available when they need it. And in April 2026, they published a report showing it might not be. SAS's April 2026 Aviation Insights report is worth reading carefully. The headline, Europe is heading toward a structural shortage of sustainable aviation fuel starting around 2030. Not because demand is lower than expected, because supply is nowhere near where it needs to be. Not a single major European ESAF production facility has reached final investment decision. The factories that need to exist by 2030 are not being built fast enough. SAS Senior Vice President Mads Brandstrup Nielsen put it plainly. What we are seeing now is a reminder of how exposed Europe remains to global fuel shocks. That warning was written before anyone fully modeled what Supersonic would do to the equation. So let's do the math. One Boom Overture carries 65 to 80 passengers. One Boeing 787-9 carries around 290. The 787 is already one of the most fuel-efficient widebodies ever built. The Overture burns 5 to 7 times more fuel per passenger than that economy seat. Every supersonic flight that replaces a subsonic one doesn't just add slightly to fuel demand. It multiplies it. And here is the irony that's worth sitting with. Boom Supersonic's entire environmental argument rests on one claim. The Overture will operate on 100 sustainable aviation fuel. That is how they justify the carbon footprint. Not by burning less fuel, they burn dramatically more, but by making the fuel clean. Except the clean fuel doesn't exist yet at the scale Supersonic would require. SAS is not fighting the plane. They are fighting for the fuel that their entire future depends on, and warning that Supersonic could consume it before European airlines ever get their share. There is one more layer to this that almost nobody is discussing. This supersonic revival is entirely an American project. The executive order came from Washington. The factory is in North Carolina. The orders came from United Airlines, American Airlines, and Japan Airlines. The company is headquartered in Colorado. Europe has not followed. ESA, the European Aviation Safety Agency, has not lifted its overland restrictions. Supersonic over the continent remains illegal, which means the Overture is, at least initially, a transatlantic tool, not a European one. SAS doesn't fly the routes that Boom is targeting. They don't need a supersonic jet. Their competitive advantage is punctuality, sustainability, and the deep loyalty of Scandinavian business travelers who care about both. But the fuel market is global. Every barrel of SAF that an Overture burns crossing the Atlantic from New York to London is a barrel that isn't available for an A350 flying from Copenhagen to Chicago. Every unit of demand that Supersonic adds to the SAF market tightens supply for the airlines trying to comply with European law. SAS isn't fighting a plane. They're fighting a market distortion, one created in America, imposed on the world, and with consequences that fall hardest on the airlines who have done the most to prepare for a cleaner future. The Concorde died because the world wasn't ready for it. Too loud, too thirsty, too limited to survive on economics alone. The Overture is quieter. It has real orders from real airlines. It has a factory in North Carolina and a government with an executive order clearing its path. The technology works. The regulatory door is open. It might actually succeed. But success for one technology doesn't guarantee success for the entire industry. SAS has spent the last decade rebuilding itself around a single bet: that sustainable aviation fuel would arrive in time to save European aviation from its own carbon commitments. That clean fuel would be the thing that let them keep flying without apology. Supersonic travel doesn't share that bet. It just shares the fuel. And for SAS, that's not a philosophical disagreement. That's an existential one.